Croeso pawb, welcome everyone. So, I thought I would do an end of summer video. Now, I did at the beginning of the spring do a couple of videos and I was planning to do them every month. But I did say, disclaimer, I would probably get too busy, and that did happen. So I'm just going to give you an update now of what's going on in the garden coming to the end of the year and let you know what's worked, what hasn't worked. You know, I like to be really truthful, and as I always say, tell you where the garden has given my ego a bit of a slap in the face, because it happens every year. Just when you think, I'm doing this great this year, from nature, just to remind you who's in charge. So just behind me here, I've got my tomato plants, and I have canned so far this year 35 jars. So those are 35 pint jars. And what happened the end of August is was it the end of August? I think it was the beginning of August. Anyway, at some point in August, I got hit down with quite a nasty virus. And due to my history with autoimmune disease, I have to be really careful when I got a virus because symptoms can come back. So I have to really take it easy, and I had to just totally surrender to the garden. My partner kept watering, but things didn't get as much attention as they should have. And the tomatoes was one of them. So they didn't get trimmed as well as they usually do, they didn't get tied up, but they've done really well. And today I'm about to take another harvest. I'm hoping I can get at least another 10 jars of tomatoes before the end of the season. So today I'm just going to cut everything back, take what tomatoes are ready up the house, and then just literally there will be the stems left with a few green tomatoes. And if they don't ripen, which they might not now because there's not great weather forecast, then it will be green tomato chutney for everyone for Christmas. So let's have a look what else is going on in the polytunnel before we head on outside. So the sweet corn is coming to the end now. There's a few cobs left. I only grow a small amount because it's mainly me that enjoys the sweet corn, because my partner can't have too much because of digestive issues. Now you might notice around the place there's so-called weeds. Now remember, weeds are just plants growing in the wrong place. And in fact, none of these are weeds. They're medicinal plants that are sharing and being very generous. So I've got mullein, and one of the reasons that is because at the end of the year I cut off the mullein spike, and they quite often end up in the compost heap, and I top all the beds with compost in here. I've got Nicotiana rustica, tobacco plants. I've even got mugwort just growing everywhere, and it's a delight to see them being so generous. So the sweet corn is doing here, and on the ends here, which I'm not sure you will see down there, and so I'll do a close-up, is there's some very small mini plants. And what happened is, when I was unwell, things like Brussels sprouts and kale were meant to go out in here, because I like to keep some in here in case we have a really harsh winter and stuff outside doesn't survive. Then I put some in here, but when I was unwell, they became pot bound. So they've ended up a bit like fairy Brussels sprouts, and who knows, the fairies might like Brussels sprouts on their Christmas dinner. So I'm going to leave them in and see what happens to those. So on these couple of beds, again, when I was unwell, I didn't get round to potting on the lettuce, so only a few survived. In fact, I think there's more mullein here now than lettuce. But also this lettuce I've let go to seed because you can just self-seed then. And then if lettuce goes everywhere in the polytunnel, that's fine, because I can just dig it up with the roots and move it to where I want it to be. And then behind me, I've got the peppers and the chilies and the cucumbers and the courgettes. The cucumbers and the courgettes are coming to the end, as you can see there. I've just got one more little harvest to do, and we'll have lots of pickled, not courgettes, sorry, gherkins. Getting confused, my courgettes are there. Gherkins and cucumbers are behind me. And I'm going to pickle what's left of those, because we love having pickled gherkin and cucumbers with dill in the winter. And then behind me, as I said, I've got the peppers and chilies. The peppers have done really well, loads of green peppers, but because it hasn't been quite as warm this year, we've only had a few red ones, so we've been eating lots of green ones. And then the chili peppers behind, they're only now starting to redden. And interestingly, I grew another variety this year, and they look like they have become severely deficient in something. Let me just compare these leaves. So, look, I don't know if you can tell the difference in the colour of the leaves. They're right next to each other, but the one hasn't done as well as the other. So that's really interesting. I don't know why. It could be a deficiency in the soil. It could be that I wasn't giving them as much food because I was unwell. I usually top the soil with grass cuttings, and I didn't get round to doing that. But interesting that one chilli pepper done it more than the other. Now you might also see there's lots of wasps flying around in here, as well as loads of other things. That's the advantage of having all the different herbal medicines in here. But while I was ill, the wasps moved in and built a nest underneath some cardboard. And I've just kind of left them to it. We work in harmony in here. I come in, I water, I can go quite close up to the nest. They're not that bothered. And they've had such a tough year this year. I'm really happy to share the space with them. And then down the bottom end of the polytunnel, which you've seen in many other videos, but I'm just going to point out some things now. So the calendula is still going, but some of it's gone over, so it'll be self-seeding lovely. Echinacea is now starting to go over, and it's got that lovely spiky feeling on the seed head, so hopefully it will drop some seed and self-seed. The courgettes are starting to get that mildew, which they always get, so I need to cut that back today. Lemongrass is done quite well. There's some nice bits of lemongrass coming. Dill self-seeded everywhere. The loofah I've never grown before, and I don't know how well it's done this year because it has been a cooler year, a wetter year. Luckily, because I wash the polytunnel cover, the light levels stay quite well in here, so the tomatoes have done great. The chilies and the peppers, maybe not quite as good as last year, but there hasn't been a massive drop because the light levels stay quite good in here. And then over this side, things like the major celandine just starting to, well, it's interesting. The outside edges are starting to dry, but there's still definite growth coming inside. The tree mallow pretty much stays all year in here. And then I'm also amongst it all, because it's food is medicine and herbs are medicine, it's all medicine. I've got parsley, I've got chard, I've got my sage, I've got some spinach, there's some chamomile, there's some ashwagandha. So I'll do close-ups as well of things, so hopefully by the side of me as I'm talking there's some close-ups so you can see some of the plants up close and personal. But things are definitely changing in here. Feels like it's going over to autumn, but also when the sun comes out it's lovely and warm in here still. So it is about a month behind in here, so whereas outside it really feels like coming into October, this kind of feels more like end of August, beginning of September. So it's great to have that extension in here, and I'm sure the wasps are appreciating it as well. Another thing I'm behind with is the winter salads, so I'm going to get some fleece on these to get them going, but they are germinating, all the mustards, the endives. And I also planted some wild lettuce as I didn't get much outside, and I'm hoping I can get a little harvest in the polytunnel before the first frost and maybe protect them so a couple can go over to next year. Also in the polytunnel I've left lots of the tree spinach, so I'm going to end up with lots of seedlings next year probably. Because if you look close, there's lots and lots of black fly on them. So they've been like sacrificial plants, but also the wasps are really enjoying munching on these. So another thing I'm doing to help out the wasps. So outside it's looking very different. As I said, it definitely feels at least a month ahead of in the polytunnel. And things, again, my ego got slapped in the face in the garden. Not so much by the slugs this year, even though we did get a lot of slugs, but the little bits of wood that I put down around the place, and you can check that video out I done about slugs, really helped. It was when I was unwell, the caterpillars moved in. And I never net anything, I usually just come and pick the caterpillars off, and they had a bit of a field day on the Brussels sprouts, which is fine. There's still plenty of Brussels sprouts, and it's all about sharing. You know, I've got the benefit that I can go to the shop if my crops fail here, but wildlife doesn't have that benefit, so I'm happy to share to some degree anyway. Lots of borage here, borage, depends what you say. And underneath the borage or borage, I've got some of my brassicas, and the borage has actually protected that quite well. So I'm going to be taking that out soon. Behind me, I've got loads of celery, and in fact the advantage of this being a really wet winter is because I never water anything outside. The only rule against that is when I plant things outside, if it doesn't rain within 10 days, I do give a little dribble of water to get it through. but we run off rainwater harvesting here, which is mainly for the polytunnel. So things just need to fend for themselves. And celery loves water, and usually my celery's pretty rubbish, but because we had a really wet summer, that's something that's benefited from it. And then outside, as the same in the polytunnel, I've got things that have self-seeded, like I've got valerian just randomly coming up in the veg beds, but it will make it really easy to dig out the roots, and chances are that's going to be there for life now. So let's have a look at the rest of the garden and how it's going into autumn. So the one thing that the boards didn't really help with the slugs was the swede. They decimated a lot, but last year they ate 80, and I'm probably left with about, out of 80 I planted out this year, I'm probably left with about 10, so it's a bit better than last year. Parsnips are doing really well, celeriac's doing really well. I haven't managed to harvest the onions yet, which, you know, is getting a bit late, but you know, you win some, you lose some. I'll dig those in the next week. And the leeks are doing really well behind me. And then right behind me, there's the pumpkin patch and some courgettes. And they've kind of gone over now, so what I'm doing, rather than this year, I don't feel I've got the energy to fully come down here on my own with a wheelbarrow and push uphill to the house all the pumpkins. So every time I'm coming down to get some food for lunch or for dinner, then what I'm doing, I'm going up with a handful of pumpkins as well. So everywhere in the house at the moment, I'm squirreling away any spare spaces for pumpkins and squashes. But they've done really well. The slugs did get some. I think the slugs probably ate about 6 of them. Not the plants for the actual pumpkins, but there's still lots there. And there's lots of Hokkaidos and veg squash are the main ones I plant, and some little orange ones that tend to go for the small ones because there's only 2 of us. And whilst I have got 2 or 3 large ones, I do try and limit the large ones that exist, because we haven't got a fridge at the moment because we haven't got enough electricity because we live off grid, but hopefully that's going to be changing soon. So I haven't got a fridge to put them in, so when I cut into a large pumpkin, I tend to have to chop it all up and can it very quickly. So it's much easier for us to have the small green Hokkaidos, which is perfect for 2. Okay, and on the bottom end of the garden now, burdock. This was one that I didn't notice last winter and has run away with me. So I'm going to end up with quite a few burdock seedlings next year, which is fine. They can be moved. Kale bed needs a bit of weeding, but there's lots and lots of kale, which is great. I always do a whole bed of kale because it's great to have that in cowl and soup over the winter and just stir fry, and who doesn't love kale? And then, I'm not sure whether you'll be able to see, but right far behind where the pumpkin patch is my dried bean bed. So I'm leaving that out for as long as I can until the first frost. But I'm going to start probably taking the bolotis next week. So in there we've got boloti beans, rhondda, black beans, and the giant Greek, which are like giant butter beans. And over the years of experimenting, those are the 3 beans. And I also do soup peas, but they've been harvested already. Those are the ones that we do for drying. And what we're looking at doing here is, my goal is to be self-sufficient in definitely pumpkins, beans and tomatoes. Whilst we're not there yet, we're getting there closer each year, although this year with the tomatoes might not have because of the illness, but you win some, you lose some. So just to kind of summarise the veg garden this year, the main problem, I would say, was me being unwell rather than slugs and things going away. But the beauty about nature is nature carries on. There's still plenty of food. And putting in systems that work for when I'm not here has been really beneficial. As I mentioned before, it's just me in the garden. It's a large garden for one person. I do get my apprentice helping 2 days a month, but it is a large space for me to manage on top of working full time. So little systems like putting the boards down for the slugs that enable me to do slug checks on my terms, that can be really beneficial, and I really advise checking that video out if you've had issues with slugs. And also the MyPex, which I've set up for the larger crops, that again makes it possible. So one last bed to look at, which has got really weedy, the herb bed. Whilst that's not really true because there's herbs everywhere. I've got California poppy in here, there's mullein, there's chamomile, there's vervain, there's burdock, there's mallow. But there's an area where I grow herbs in larger quantities. But I've got something to share about that, which I might be changing. And this is the last area. I'm doing a quick little update for you all today, coming into autumn. So the lemon balm's still doing great. St John's wort, loads of mugwort. Got skullcap here, that's going over now. Although there are some with still a few flowers on, lots of valerian. But the main thing about this patch is every year, this time of year, it's full of plants that are useful, but maybe not as useful where they are. You might call them weeds. And some plants are here in much larger quantities than I need. And I feel lots of these plants are wild plants. And maybe they need to be in a more wilder area. So what my plan is to move some of these and integrate them into the wilder areas. And also what I want to do is in the field behind where the camera is, I want to incorporate more biodiversity. So over the next year, I'm going to be incorporating lots of these plants, but amongst the trees and amongst the wild spaces, because I feel like I'm trying to win a losing battle here a lot of the time. And in the veg beds, which I've showed you, quite often there's little spaces there that I can add enough, because the great thing about herbs is you don't need that much to be able to make medicine. And I'm making medicine for my clinic and for my students and for myself, but actually you don't need that much to make a litre of tincture. And many of the plants you'll cut down, like lemon balm, chamomile, wormwood for instance, you cut down and they keep giving and keep giving. And whilst wormwood can be a big bush, it will also survive quite small. So I really need to rethink this area and just keep some of the large plants like the elecampane. I can grow that in a nice straight line for ease of harvesting, and anything that I grow on a massive scale, then I can keep in this kind of space. But I'm feeling I'm probably going to end up with a couple of rows of the roots, like the valerian, elecampane and mallow, that I plant and harvest every few years. So I harvest like a coppice really. Apart from that, a lot of these plants I'm going to try and incorporate elsewhere, because also what I'm teaching is wild Welsh herbalism, and also what I'm teaching is medicine doesn't need a separate space. It's amongst everything else, because my veg garden benefits so much from all the herbs, because this patch here and all the herbs that I've got amongst everything in the veg garden is brimming with the pollinators, brimming with the insects. So if you've enjoyed this little update, do subscribe to my YouTube channel. If you like watching videos by a crazy Welsh woman that's not done to a super high standard, it's just me with my iPhone telling it like it is. If you don't like something that's super crisp, super clean, I haven't got a film crew, but if you like watching what's going on, if you like to get real information, telling it like it is, talking about the garden, giving me an ego slap, then subscribe to my YouTube channel. And you can also connect with me further over on my website, selinawalker.earth, and sign up to my free newsletter. Diolch am gwylio. Thank you for watching.